Hi, this is Professor McLaughlin with a lecture on Chapter 32 of Kubicek's Dynamic Business Law and Management 12A at Irvine Valley College. So this chapter covers bankruptcy and reorganization and introduces us to the law and also that process. And we're going to encounter in this chapter a lot of policy that has driven the law. Policy such as what debts can you not avoid or discharge in bankruptcy? And that's a policy decision. There are tax debts and child support obligations that the bankruptcy law will not discharge. And as we think about the area as a whole, it covers so many different areas of the law and can touch upon lots of different areas of the law that there's a lot of policy, I don't want to say policy implications, but there are a lot of rules within the bankruptcy code that were driven by public policy and not necessarily by just pure legislation, pure lawmaking, because this is an area that affects multiple parties, multiple entities. When one individual declares bankruptcy or a corporation declares bankruptcy, and whether it is a discharge Chapter 7 or a reorganization, you have creditors, you have car finance companies, and that will bring in all kinds of banking law and uniform commercial code law. And you'll have informal agreements that will be affected by a bankruptcy, informal receivables, informal deliverables, contract law, property law, debts for medical bills, debts for in dissolution of marriage, things that are owed, as I mentioned, child support payments. And some of that will be handled within the bankruptcy process itself, and some of it will be handled with outside civil litigation. So you'll also see multiple courts get involved. So it's a very interesting area of the law that covers lots of other interesting areas of the law. And what we want to understand in this chapter is that this is a process that the law provides to hopefully ideally protect the interests of two sides, debtors and creditors. So bankruptcy protection that's offered by the bankruptcy code and the bankruptcy court is granted to the debtor, but the law is also meant to ideally protect the interests of the creditor as well. And creditors are the federal government, the state government, individuals, other businesses, people that are owed. And what the bankruptcy process does is provide a system for unwinding a debtor who's seeking protection while also protecting the creditor's interests. So, people go into bankruptcy because they have a lot of debt. But what's not obvious is how that debt was created. So how the debt was created, and I also want to mention, and this is easier to discuss and do in a physical classroom, but people's perceptions of bankruptcy, people's perceptions of it as a stigma or a freebie or a free pass where you can charge up your credit card debts and get away without paying them off. I mean, there are, I'm sure, situations where that happens, and we'll see throughout the chapter that one of the reasons the Bankruptcy Code was rewritten in 2005 was to address abuse but by debtors, but also to address abuse by creditors as well. So predatory lending, creditors who are collecting through harassing measures, that kind of thing, was also addressed by a new revision, which is now 10 years old, of the Bankruptcy Code in 2005. But ultimately and fundamentally, people have more debt than income, and they're seeking a way to either reorganize their business, their personal finances, in order to restructure that debt, in order to still pay on that debt, but over a longer period of time through restructuring, or discharge that debt through bankruptcy with the Chapter 7. So this is not a brilliant graphic. It's a little hard to see, and maybe you can get up close. Just kind of looking at where bankruptcies occurred, and for the most part, these are Chapter 9 bankruptcies of cities, which we've seen an extraordinary amount of post the financial crisis and the recession. So we'll talk a little bit more about municipal bankruptcies in Chapter 9, but let's take a step back and think about the overall concept of an entity, a business, or an individual having so much debt that they need court protection, or they want to seek help from the Bankruptcy Code. Where did all that debt come from? Where do you think that debt came from? And I want you to answer two things in your head right now. Where did the debt come from the individual seeking bankruptcy? Where did all the debt come from the business? And imagine that scenario. What is it that drives people to bankruptcy? Is it bad money management? Overspending? I have a fancy lifestyle, paying for all this great plastic surgery. I abuse my credit card. Is that all it is? So one of the top 3 reasons for bankruptcy in Orange County, California, and the entire United States, one of the 3 is, oh Lord, you guys can't see my my slide. Hold on. Bankruptcy due to medical bills. So this slide takes a look at the age range where people in 2013 declared bankruptcy due to medical costs. And I guess we'll see in time if the Affordable Care Act will remedy this situation, but people cannot afford sudden, unplanned for medical costs like cancer. One chemotherapy treatment for breast cancer, one treatment is $250,000. And if you are a patient with breast cancer with not great insurance or no insurance in 2013, how would you cover that expense? And what would your choices need to be? So medical bills drive people to bankruptcy. Job loss, which was a large part of what occurred after the financial crisis and the subprime mortgage lending crisis, whereas mortgage brokers went, they didn't all go bankrupt, but as they were forced to lay off people, get absorbed by other financial institutions, as some of them did close, people lost their jobs, and they were typically not young, well, not old, but in their 30s and 40s, trying to retool at a time that we're also going through a very large recession. So a lot of bankruptcies. And And with the sudden downturn in the housing industry, you had a lot of industries connected to that suffer as well. So as people are losing jobs, consumer spending goes down. As people are no longer buying homes, there's no longer a big push to build homes as well, which can touch multiple industries. So real estate, construction, consumer spending, retailers suffered, that kind of thing. So top 3 reasons people go bankrupt: job loss, medical bills, and divorce, forcing people into untenable, unpredictable financial situations, and they seek protection from the bankruptcy code. Sorry about the funky slides. So what are the whole goals of the Bankruptcy Act? One primary goal is to provide debtors with the opportunity to realize a fresh start, a fresh financial start. And I mentioned this already, and the flip side of that is to protect creditors. So some creditors are protected more than others. Secured creditors who have lent money secured by an underlying asset like a car. When you finance a car, what do? If you don't pay, they repossess it. What does the bank do if you don't pay your home mortgage? It forecloses and repossesses the home. So these secured debts are premium debts, where the debtor is really not able to avoid that debt. And as you see throughout, as we get a couple more slides and throughout this chapter, creditors are put into a priority class, and top priority creditors who are paid back first are secured creditors. Auto loans, home loans, or what if you're a business and you've sought a loan from a local bank and the collateral for that loan is your inventory or your machinery, and that's a secured debt as well. So protection for creditors for sure, but some creditors get more protection than others. Credit card companies have the least protection, which may explain why they collect so hard. So bankruptcy protection under Chapter 7 offers you a discharge of debt, the opportunity to not pay those credit card companies, and to only pay your top priority lenders and your secured debts. And that is the fresh start that's mentioned. The other chapters, Chapter 11 for corporations and Chapter 13 for individuals, allow for restructuring and a plan for payment over time to get the creditors off your back, to give you the breathing space to maybe generate more income personally or with your business. So bankruptcy law is federal. Sorry, this is bothering me. It is federal law, and bankruptcy court is a federal court, and it's granted under the Constitution. The bankruptcy court in the Central District is in Santa Ana. And I want you to also make the connection that the court has federal powers, which also means that anybody who tries to commit fraud in bankruptcy will come under federal penalty, which is always much greater than state penalty. And bankruptcy trustees who manage the bankruptcy estate and the liquidation of assets in order to pay off creditors have access to those federal powers. And the penalties are strict. It's not a state court. So the code that covers bankruptcy law is BAPCPA. It's the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act of 2005. It made it more difficult to qualify for a Chapter 7. So you petition the bankruptcy court in order to ask them to grant you protection under the bankruptcy law. And the court may say no, that you are not entitled to Chapter 7 liquidation, and instead you need to file a Chapter 13 and restructuring, which means no discharge of debt. So the law was revised in response to an increase in bankruptcy filings. It was in response to an understanding that debtors were abusing the bankruptcy code and that debtors had the ability to repay, and so they needed to repay and not be protected under Chapter 7, which provided the discharge in debt and a fresh start. So this is an exhibit from your book. It just explains the various chapters. The ones we're going to focus on are 7 and 13, which are for individual debts. Chapter 11, which is reorganizing a corporation. And 9, which is municipalities that declare bankruptcy, which some of the largest municipal bankruptcies occurred after the credit crisis. So just an exhibit on total filings in 2011. That's kind of an old statistic. There were a lot of filings in 12 and 13. Some of the largest bankruptcy filings didn't take place till 2012, when individuals, cities, municipalities really were not recovering from the credit crisis, which started in 2008 and early 2009. So let's talk a little bit about Chapter 9 and Chapter 9 municipal bankruptcies. This slide just talks about the biggest ones. Detroit was the largest U.S. city to declare bankruptcy in 2013, and one of the really contentious parts of that bankruptcy was what were the city's assets that they were able to sell, and what were the city's debts that they weren't able to pay. So some of the largest debts for cities are pensions that they owe city workers. And those pensions are to pay firefighters and policemen and city workers. After they retire, a pension is a monthly or annual income that you earn over the course of your career with the city. And that's a city debt. And that was one of the largest debts that Detroit had, and created a lot of tension on how to pay it. If you can imagine, a city worker who retired but lived 30 years after retirement is relying on that income. So if the city defaulted on that debt, that would be very problematic if the city could no longer pay the retired fireman or the retired city worker. So I want you to sit and think about your own bankruptcy estate. If you were to declare bankruptcy now, what would be your assets? And what would be your debt? And maybe adding to the slide things you don't see. And for married people, it'll be different. And for very old people, it'll be different. It depends on the stage of life that you're at. And now I want you to think about a city when it goes bankrupt. What are its assets? That was very problematic for Detroit. Is public art an asset? If a city is given something to the city's people, can the city then sell that to pay off a creditor? And can the city sell buildings? And can it sell art in the art museum? And what are its assets? Vehicles, goods, inventory maybe. And what are they able to sell? What is owned by the people of Detroit and not the city itself? So that was very contentious in that bankruptcy. Debt to the city, the pension, maybe city-owned land had property tax was owed. whatever the cost of running the city, electricity, repairs to streets, payroll, that will all be debts of the city. So this graphic you can look at in your own time, but just kind of an explanation of how much Detroit owed and how much, and then broken down to what exactly were its debts. So how does a bankruptcy case start? How does it work? How does it unwind? And the very first thing is to file the bankruptcy petition. The rules say that the bankruptcy court, if it grants the petition, will appoint a bankruptcy trustee who is a neutral third party, and that trustee will administer the bankruptcy, liquidating assets to pay creditors, holding meetings, and under the procedural rules, making sure that the unwinding of the estate, whatever it is, a corporate or individual, is orderly and people are paid accordingly. Creditors and debtors have a mandatory meeting. A plan is created and approved. The court needs to approve each of the steps along the way. And then some debts may be discharged, some debts will be paid, and that plan will be carried out. And debtors cannot hide funds or transfer funds in anticipation of bankruptcy. One of the things the trustee is required to do is look at transfers, historical data in the debtor's account to see if funds were moved before bankruptcy was declared in anticipation of whatever, squirreling it away, preferring one creditor over another. The code will not allow those kinds of things. So there can be a voluntary bankruptcy where you file the petition, but also involuntary bankruptcies exist where creditors can get together under certain rules and declare bankruptcy involuntarily on a debtor. Okay, so Exhibit 32.3 really explains the schedule. So much like tax schedules, these are accountings, inventories, declarations of property, declarations of debt. Schedule G, executory contracts and expired leases. We talked about that in Chapter 13. Schedule I, a statement of the debtor's current income. So this is what the bankruptcy court uses in order to, and the trustee uses in order to help the debtor and the creditors by gathering information. So the bankruptcy estate is, I want you to imagine a big castle, and the debtor wants as much stuff protected by that castle as possible and wants to dig a big moat around it and make sure that nobody can take stuff out that's collected behind the castle walls. So that behind the castle walls is the bankruptcy estate. The bankruptcy trustee is protecting it. The bankruptcy law is protecting it from creditors who are the infidels invading from afar, trying to get behind the walls and into the debtor's estate. In addition, the law provides that there are things that that can be excluded from the bankruptcy estate that won't automatically go behind the walls of the castle, and these are called exemptions. And there are federal and there are state exemptions. So, as in some, well, if you recall, the state, not if you recall, you may have read in the chapter that the state law is able to create its own exemptions, but it can't interfere or negate what the federal exemptions are. So state law can add to and provide more stringent, but it can't be less than what the federal government. And so it has stated. So exemptions allow parties to hold things back from being included in the bankruptcy estate, and that will allow them not to be sold as well. and just more listings of exemptions. So a couple of other things. What the bankruptcy trustee does is look at the debtor's activities, and the debtor's not allowed to give preferential payment to one creditor within 90 days of filing bankruptcy. So if a debtor is anticipating filing bankruptcy and they're like, well, I'll just pay off, I'm going to declare bankruptcy in a couple of months, let me just pay off these creditors and not pay off other creditors. Pardon me, that's not allowed. That's called a preferential payment. Also, you're not allowed to hide funds. That's called a fraudulent transfer. So within the bankruptcy code, or a lot of the things that, the trustee has the power to make sure the debtor is not defrauding the bankruptcy court. So just a typical schematic of a bankruptcy, the flow of a bankruptcy petition. First, debt counseling is required. The petition is filed. An automatic stay is put in place, which prevents creditors from suing. The debtor takes financial management courses, meets with the creditors. The bankruptcy estate is created, and in order to freeze everything and avoid further transfers, and then you have secured creditors who are preferred and unsecured creditors who are not preferred and less protected. So these next couple of slides are just those exhibits talking about the priority of unsecured creditors, and also discussing what debts are not dischargeable. So here's where we look at really the policy behind the bankruptcy code, where alimony is not dischargeable. Taxes are not dischargeable. What's other interesting ones? Or if there's a claim, if a party committed fraud and had to pay a judgment on that, those kinds of things are not dischargeable. So claims meaning a judgment claim. Debts not discharged in previous bankruptcies are not dischargeable. Okay, and then wrapping up a little bit, getting to the Chapter 13 flowchart. So Chapter 13 follows the same initial plan as the Chapter 7, except the end result is different. So Chapter 7, you pay off some debtors, you don't pay off others, and you start fresh. Chapter 13, you're still working, you're still earning, you just want to reorganize, but you want bankruptcy protection. You need the automatic stay, you need the creditors off your back, you need the court's help in coming up with this 3 to 5 year reorganization plan, where you're going to outline and then abide by how you're going to pay over time the debts that you owe. And this plan is hashed out between the debtor and the creditor with the help of the bankruptcy trustee, approved by the court, and then revisited annually to see if it's still working. And then a couple of fun things. So you can click through some of the world's largest bankruptcies. I mean, really, Detroit, Lehman Brothers, Washington Mutual, such a rash of bankruptcies in Southern California, the West, Michigan, just places recently really hard hit by the subprime mortgage crisis and the disintegration of the housing market, driving the U.S. into recession along with many European countries, and then affecting the banking system by destabilizing it, and also creating a worldwide recession. So just really interesting time to be living and thinking about bankruptcy, also considering why do we have these processes. I mean, we don't have poor hardcore prisons. We don't throw people into debtor's prison. We don't send them to the workhouse to work off their debt. Instead, we come up with a piece of legislation that allows for a process to protect the debtor, protect the creditor, and allow people to pay debts, come out the other side not dead and not defeated, with an opportunity to start again. Okay, so we will end it there. Thank you.